All right. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today as we discuss Appium from a practitioner's perspective. Again, we are joined today by Q2E Mobile Banking. And from Q2E, we have Jan and Jessica, two great QA professionals who will be discussing today how they use Appium and a bit about how they integrate with Kobiton to achieve their software testing goals. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jan.
All right, thanks, Drew, and hello to everyone joining us today. So I'm going to start out by telling you guys a little bit of background about Q2. We are a cloud-based digital banking solutions company. We're headquartered right here in Austin, Texas, and our solutions are used for things like deposits, money movement, lending, security and fraud, stuff like this. So chances are, if you are a member of a credit union or a community-sized bank in the United States, then you very well may be running our software or using our software right now. We have about 870 financial institutions that we support across the Q2 platform, as well as Centrix, CorePro, Grow, and Cloud Lending. And we've got some pretty big customers. 30 of our customers are greater than 10 billion in assets. And so, it's really important to us, and this is why our mission is up on this slide, because our focus is to build stronger communities by strengthening the financial institutions that serve them. And so we're going to talk to you a little bit about our mobile automation journey. And at the end, we welcome any questions, comments, feedback that y'all have for us. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we're doing. So in providing online banking and other financial solution software for our customers, we support 5 different versions of iOS and 6 versions of Android. And friends, that does not include the dot releases. And then when you take into account the various platform versions of our own products that we support, the permutations get a bit staggering. And so I'm imagining all of you at home, like with tears in your eyes, nodding sympathetically, because anytime there's a patch release or anytime there's a hotfix that goes out, we need to make sure that our software is going to work for all of our customers and work well. So data shows that when someone goes to check their bank account balance or transfer money or pay a bill, 80% of the time they do so by pulling out a phone, a tablet, some type of mobile device. They're not going to crank up the old x86 and go to Internet Explorer and do their online banking. They're going to pull their phone out of their pocket and want to be able to move money at their fingertips. And it's really important for us and for our customers that when they move that money, the software behaves appropriately, because they get really, really, really mad if it doesn't. So this was the problem that we needed to solve. How can we support the various permutations of our platform, the different devices, the different hardware, the different everything, and ensure that we could keep the release frequency that the market demands, and in the process deliver a quality product that delighted our customers. So why did we choose Appium? Well, we chose Appium for a couple of reasons. First of all, because we support Android. And so it was critical that we have a framework that enabled us to automate on Android. We also support Apple. So we needed a platform that enabled us to test on our iOS devices as well. And also because we use Selenium WebDriver for our UI automation. And so Selenium was a very familiar platform for us to use already. And so thus Appium made a lot of sense. It was, we didn't find other tools or other frameworks that enabled us to do testing on both. And again, the familiarity with Selenium was a big plus. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica now to talk a little bit about kind of what we did first as we, started our mobile automation journey, and kind of what we found as we went along.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica. I'm a developer here at Q2. So I come from a slightly different background than you might expect in some cases. I know a lot of shops like to take QA and throw them into automation, and some shops do the opposite. They take dev and throw them into automation. So while I don't have a professional QA background, I am very passionate about it. And I have a wonderful team helping me along the way. So we decided to pick out two really high value scenarios because, as Jan just told you, we have so many things that we support, and our application is not just those pretty screens that you saw in the example slide. It's a fairly expansive application that allows you to do a lot of cool banking things. We also support commercial and treasury banking, not just your run-of-the-mill home banking. So it's expansive. So we decided to tackle just a couple of things first. We decided to focus primarily on Android to begin with, partially because we have more permutations of Android, and just within the marketplace, Android tends to be the trickier of the two to tackle. So we decided to target a stability test where we repeat the same test on one of our app builds on one device over a long period of time, and a multi-platform test where we target a wide range of our builds on all of our supported Android OSs, minus beta, with a single test. So kind of a depth versus a breadth. And tackling these two scenarios allowed us to really shake out a lot of challenges and start building our framework so that we can expand it to hit others. So for instance, in the stability, some of the challenges are staying connected to the device over a 12-hour period, gathering statistics in a useful, analyzable way, since a healthy 12-hour period can have up to 1,200 iterations of our tests, and then debugging across all of those iterations, screenshots, logs, all of the things that if one iteration fails, if 100 iterations fail, if the environment goes down for some reason, how do we figure out what the real problem is? And then in the multi-platform test, while some of those challenges also apply, the other challenges that really are more unique there are the layout differences across all the devices. So imagine we're running 15 tests on Android OS 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So 15 times 5, even on just a single test. That's a lot of potentially different layouts to have to tackle. Supporting the hardware ourselves as a shop, I mean, you could have one person whose sole job was doing that, and they would still struggle to keep up. Mm-hmm. And then comparing the results across each other. Do we see more failures in Android 5? Do we see more failures in Android 7? Do we have a particular app build that's failing across the board? So being able to see all of those results at once and compare them has definitely been a challenge. So just to talk a little bit about how we're organizing our framework, and this is still in its very early stages, so this doesn't cover everything, and there's lots of room for expansion and improvement. But the top 3 blue boxes here are ones that really are our attempts to utilize and expand upon Appium. So we have our page object models, which include the element locators, what's on the page, and then the interactions with the page itself. Things like clicking a button or taking a flow of actions to log off. Then we have some libraries devoted to extending the WebDriver. It is super cool and super useful that Appium supports so many different WebDrivers across these devices, but a lot of times you get back generic exceptions because it's supporting so many. You'll get back a generic exception with some message. So we're attempting to extend it to get more useful messages out of it. exceptions that will tell us, do we need to reconnect? Was there not a device available? Did the application have a problem logging in? So it's a range of environment to application specific exceptions that make our debugging lives easier. And then extending it to make reconnecting a little more friendly. If I'm running my 12-hour test on one device, guaranteed at some point during that 12-hour period, something's going to disconnect. So in a lot of those cases, maybe there was just a socket hang-up. Maybe there was just a blip in the network, and all we need to do is reconnect to a new session, but with the same app on the same device. So we're trying to build some of that logic into our extension of WebDriver. And then just making some of the actions a little more tester friendly. Find and wait. We don't necessarily want all of our automators to have to memorize all of the syntax to be able to do a wait for an element command. So we're adding some more friendly syntax to them. We're handling timeouts in a sensible way and logging the important information that we care about. And then grabbing artifacts for debugging. Appium and the drivers give us a lot of access to things like the device logs, taking screenshots. In the case of Kobiton, we're able to go grab device and Appium logs bundled together. So we have some libraries focused on helping us grab anything that we need for doing debugging. And then the two boxes at the bottom are not specifically Appium related, but there are other areas where we're trying to make our framework maintainable and extensible and easy to use so that any of our test teams can go pick it up and write test cases for it, whether it be our mobile team or our implementations team, or maybe even a UI team who's trying to test their new feature both in the browser and on mobile. We want to move to a point where our test cases are testing our application across all of the possible environments. So we're trying to make it really easy to pick up. So we have things like test runner extensions that include, just common fixture functionality, Jenkins integration. And then we have results and analysis libraries for producing sensible results, gathering statistics, and uploading to our internal test management tools. So to dig in a little bit more on a couple that are more Appium specific, for page object models, if you've used Appium or if you've used Selenium to do any sort of UI automated testing, you know that one of the primary ways to interact is to define the page in a programmatic way. And mobile application testing is very similar to browser UI testing in a lot of ways, in that you have the equivalent of your IE versus Firefox versus Safari in your Android versus iOS. And not only Android versus iOS, but native versus hybrid versus WebView. In our particular case, because we're focusing first on Android to try to tease out some of our issues and build this framework, we're very heavily focused on having our page object models be able to handle native and WebView. So we have a hybrid application where login is native. We have some, the menu is native. We have some internal features that are native, but the vast majority of our app is via a WebView. So our page object models need to have the logic internally to be able to handle the different possible states. And the states are defined by what device am I on? What version of our application are we running? So what I want in the end is for a tester to be able to say, go to the login page, and not have to say, if I'm on Android, do this, do this, do this. If I'm on iOS, do this, do this, do this, do this. All they have to remember is go to the login page. So if we build this logic into our page object models themselves, where our locators are smart, we dynamically determine which locators we should use based on what device we're on and what environment we're in, then that's all the tester has to remember. Go to the login page. And then we also try to build the logic in for single interactions like click such and such a button, or a full workflow like go to the login page, perform a log off. So if we have a page object model for our login page, we can say, if we want to just test maybe the username field, then we can focus on these single interactions, enter some characters into the username field, clear the characters, try some trash characters. Or if we're just passing through the login page to get to the rest of the app, then we can do one of these full workflows where we say log in with this username and password. And the page object model has the intelligence to go fill in the username, fill in the password, and then click the submit button. So that's kind of how we're building on top of the locator and the device interaction functionality that Appium and drivers give us to create these page object models that kind of encapsulate that interaction. For the WebDriver extension side of things, the remote WebDrivers are super cool and they do a lot, but they're also a little esoteric. You really have to know what's going on in order to be able to do the right thing when you're on Android native, do the right thing when you're in a web view, do the right thing when you're in iOS. So we're trying to extend WebDriver in order to make it a little easier to use just for the average person trying to write a test script. So as I mentioned, we're trying to categorize our exceptions that come back from WebDriver, because in many cases you literally get a WebDriver exception instance that has some message in it, and the message is really what you care about. It's something like socket hangup, or Appium hasn't started, or something about a device not being available. So we tease out these messages and create specific exceptions that are raised from the original WebDriver exception in order to make it easier for tests and our page object models and our libraries to be able to follow the proper logic to respond. If it's an app-related error, perhaps there was a build issue with the app, or the app wasn't able to install, or we weren't able to download it. That's an error that we would handle differently from there was no device available at the time, or Appium wasn't started, which is different from how we would handle an error such as a socket hangup or a network blip where we can simply reconnect. And then in addition to trying to make exceptions a little easier to handle, we're adding some enhancements to finding and waiting and other actions like scrolling and swiping and device interactions that make them a little easier for someone writing a test script. So syntax is a little more friendly, like wait for element or find an element, as opposed to the WebDriver wait for driver blah blah blah, the extended syntax to actually make these things happen. And having these enhancements also do some amount of intelligent exception handling and be able to handle any specific differences between Android and iOS. For example, in the case of swiping and scrolling, our application renders differently whether it's in native or web view mode. So we need to handle those actions a little bit differently. But we don't want the scripter to have to remember that. All we want them to be able to have to do is say, scroll to such and such an element, and then it does the right thing behind the covers. So last, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're using Kobiton to integrate with our testing. Kobiton provides some amazing functionality, and I've really been very pleased with how easy it is to use. So I picked out a few things that on a daily basis I make use of these. Within our framework, both of our scenarios that we're covering, both the extended overnight and the multi-device, require the ability to go and pick out a device that's available, especially the multi-device one. So Kobiton gives you the ability to specify a wildcard in the platform version or the device name of what you're picking up. So all I have to do in my config is say, I want a random Android 5 device for this test. And then I can run in parallel the set of tests on random Android 5, set of tests on random Android 6, 7, 8, and 9 across the board. And all I have to do is specify this wildcard. I don't have to know anything about the device specifics. I don't have to know any UDIDs. I don't have to know the device names. I let Kobiton go and pick out the device for me, so I don't have to worry about that. Within each session, they capture every HTTP request and response through Appium and include a screenshot with it, which has been invaluable for debugging. And a full video, even for our 12-hour overnight, full video for each session, which has also been invaluable, because sometimes the screenshot is maybe right after the problem happens and not during the problem, or maybe the individual commands leading up to it don't quite give you enough context. So I've found that using the video can be extremely useful. And then as we're trying to build this automation into our CI pipelines, Kobiton also has REST integration. So we can do things like at the end of a session, retrieve the logs for the device and for Appium. If we so wanted, we can even download the list of HTTP requests and responses. We could even download the video if we wanted. And then when we create new builds, we can even upload the new build via the REST API to their app repository. So the future looks like our mobile team kicks off a build, or let's go even further down. A dev wants to make a change. They open a PR, it kicks off a build. The build automatically gets uploaded to Kobiton. Our test suite runs on it, reports back pass or fail. The app is deleted off of Kobiton again. We grab all of the logs from the session, and we can have a full end-to-end build, test, deploy with this Kobiton integration, which is something that just wouldn't be possible if we were using physical devices, unless we had an entire team just to maintain those physical devices, which unfortunately we do not. But fortunately, Kobiton has been able to fill that gap for us very well.
All right,
Awesome.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yes, thank you, and Jan. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to some questions, and it looks like we have a few good ones. First question here: are you testing on a device connected to a machine or using the Kobiton device farm online?
That is an excellent question, because we do both. So historically, our shop has used local physical devices for manual testing. So when I first came in, that's how I started as well. Connect the device up to my laptop, run the test script, run the device back to the cabinet, grab another device, go back to my desk to run the test again. Or if I was feeling really sneaky, grab 5 devices and take them all back to my desk, which doesn't work when there's demand. So once we started integrating Kobiton, I was able to not only use different devices than we actually had, but I could run tests from home. We can run tests overnight from Jenkins. So as I'm developing tests, as I'm developing our libraries, I typically test locally because it is faster, and it can be easier to debug because the turnaround is a little quicker. But once the script is ready for prime time, then I can start running it with Kobiton devices, and not only is it convenient, I get far more coverage. So I can run the test script not just on the device I have on my desk, but I can then say, okay, it looks good on this device. Let me run it against 10 different devices and see how it does. Inevitably, one of those devices is not going to work. So it's helping us write much more robust tests as well.
Yep. And I'll add to that, we also, Q2 has a combination of private devices and cloud devices and public devices. And so we went with that approach because the private devices we have set aside for some of these long runs that Jessica is doing. And then we kind of supplement that with the public Kobiton devices so that we don't feel like we're, hoarding hoarding devices for hours on end. So that's been a good mix for us. Mm-hmm.
And thank you for that. And just as a note, for anyone who's unfamiliar, the private device cloud option they're referring to is one where Kobiton hosts your devices for you in our data centers, but are privately for your use at your company only. So thank you for that piece there. The next follow-up question looks like tacking onto that is, what's your hardware setup? Are you using a PC or a Mac, and does it make a difference?
I'm using a Mac personally. One of the nice things about Appium is it should be able to run on Mac or Linux or Windows. So theoretically, if you have a mixed shop, you should be able to write test scripts in one, write your libraries in one, and still be able to run them on another. So I personally use Mac. We use Python for our coding, which is another cool thing about Appium.
Yeah, and across our development organization, it's a mixed bag. I don't know that it's quite 50-50, probably a little bit heavier on the Mac side than Windows. But since this is something that we want to be, definitely using Kobiton is consumable by all of our Scrum teams. We know for sure that it works well with both.
Great. And what operating system are you all using?
Whatever the latest.
Mac OS.
I would have to say, yeah. We have people who are we're on Mac OS. We have some people who are updating to Mojave currently, I think. A lot of us are on High Sierra still.
Yeah.
How much time could it take to build a framework from scratch using Appium for iOS and Android?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, I can tell you from my personal experience. So I did not have any mobile experience when I started here. I did have somewhat extensive Selenium experience and somewhat extensive automation experience. So a lot of those skills translated directly into what I'm doing now. I've been working on this for about 4 months, and we have made incredible strides from a POC that was created here in-house that was really good, but was not necessarily, it was POC, right? So it didn't have the maintainability, extensibility that you really need, and the robustness across all of these devices. So I would say if you're wanting to do it in-house and you have one person with zero mobile experience working on it, I would give yourself at least 6 months to a year. Now, if you have a team, probably you could cut that down a little bit, especially a team with mobile experience.
And just kind of taking a step back and again, not specific to mobile, but to automation in general, my strong recommendation is if you are starting from scratch, whether it be mobile or UI or whatever else, pick one test. Pick one test that you know that you want to see automated, and build yourself a pipeline to where that test can be executed at any time by anyone, and report back the metrics or the pass fail or whatever else that you want to see. Get one working and get the automated pipeline in place first, because then you can always add a second test or a third test or a fifth test or a 27th test, right? But if you get one and kind of get the pipeline set, it will be much, much easier. Please do not go off and write 5,000 tests and then realize you have no way to run them.
That's absolutely right. So everything that we've done so far is just the 12-hour test and the breadth test. It is literally a test that logs in and logs off. And I have been able to build out so many useful library pieces just from that one test case. So I completely agree.
Those are great points. And how did you all select that login, logout functionality as the kind of foundational test case?
Well, it's the
first thing you do.
Every test has a login.
Yeah.
It's the first thing a user sees. It's the first indicator that there may be an environment problem. So if even if the app is working perfectly, but the FI's environment is having some sort of issue or there's some sort of network issue, login is typically the very first place that you see it. So it made a lot of sense, both from from kind of an academic building a framework standpoint and also from a practical standpoint.
Got it. And Jessica, can you speak briefly about which developer skills, since you had no experience in mobile whatsoever, you found to be most useful in kind of getting ramped up with Appium?
So for me, having strong skills in some language, so for me it happens to be Python, but I know Appium supports a lot in Java, Ruby, many different languages. So decent skills in some language. and some sort of automation experience. So being familiar with things like, how do I set up for my test? How do I tear down after a test? How do I make proper assertions to know that my test is actually testing something and not just going through the motions? So whether that be with Selenium or Robot or some other automation framework, that sort of skill is extremely useful. And even if not a professional QA background, at least an interest, or even better, a passion in quality and making sure that something is working the way it's supposed to, and not just saying, yeah, I tested it. So those are the skills that I would probably look for.
That makes sense. Can you list all the applications involved when it comes to testing? And secondly, do you have a bug tracking system that is integrated with the software?
So yes, so we use Qtest for our test management, and we are an Atlassian shop, so we're using Jira for track and plan. And so we have integration between Qtest and Jira, so that and all of our results write to Qtest. So when our runs are done, you can see the result in the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going for full integration from in the ideal world, full integration from setting up the environment to running the test to reporting back to all the appropriate places.
Yeah. And then Jessica and I are going to go on a 2-week vacation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We get that far.
That's awesome. And quick mention that Qtest was founded by the same people who started Kobiton.
I didn't know that.
Oh, cool.
You didn't? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They're a sister company, same founders. So keeping it in the family. What improvement would you like to see in Appium before calling it a near ideal test framework?
The one that jumps immediately to mind, and I think it was actually mentioned in this morning as well, was some of the device actions are not very device agnostic. So I actually just went through a pretty long exercise recently of making scrolling and swiping work across not even iOS and Android, but just within Android across different devices, making it work with our native and WebView. So there are definitely some device interactions that are not really easy enough to use yet. That's probably near the top of my list.
Got it. And the follow-up question, which I think you somewhat have answered, but maybe want to expand on, is are there any test cases that are harder to automate than others?
So off the top of my head, I can think of the test cases where there are a wide range of interactions based on either hardware form factor or OS, as well as interactions that are not that involve more of a human touch than computer. So things like swiping, like I mentioned already, so interactions like that, fingerprint, camera interaction.
RDC.
Yeah, exactly. Those areas, I haven't even begun to scratch the surface on how we're going to tackle those, but I predict that they're going to be pretty tricky.
Mm-hmm. Really quickly, can Kobiton support running web tests? Yes, it can. Is it only for mobile testing? Yes, it is. We do have a sister company called Catalan, though, again, keeping in the family, for all web tests or desktop testing. Let's see. If React was used, did you have to deal with the XPath issue in React?
We haven't had to deal with XPath yet, although I'm sure we'll have pages where we will. I have had to deal with pages within our WebView being rendered slightly differently, so attributes are populated slightly differently depending on the hardware form factor. So for instance, one of the things I was talking about making WebDriver a little more friendly with find and wait is if you're looking for perhaps a particular view on the screen that has certain text in it. Sometimes React will populate that into the text attribute, and sometimes it will populate it into the content description attribute. So our library has to be smart enough to know, okay, if I didn't find it in text, I'll check for content description first before I call it quits. So there's definitely some little fun bits that React has given to us to play with.
What have been the biggest indicators of improvements tied to your use of Appium?
It's one that isn't very tangible, but the first answer that comes to mind is peace of mind. The fact that we have a 12-hour test that runs every night, and we know that we're touching 15 different apps, which basically represent 15 different customers every night, and if something's wrong, we are going to see it the next morning. And it's the confidence that it gives us, it's the confidence that it gives our mobile team, that if there's something lurking out there, it's not going to be 2 weeks or 2 months. We're gonna see it pretty fast. And that if we do make a change, we know that automation's going to run, in no less than 12 hours, and then we'll be aware.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. How easy was it to integrate Kobiton with your CI/CD pipeline?
We only have a chunk of the pipeline right now. We're not fully end to end, but so far it has been extremely easy. The first piece I tackled was including Kobiton session information, the additional logs in the artifacts. So our jobs, both our nightly job and our breadth job, are just Jenkins. They're just Jenkins jobs. And so I'm able to, using the REST API, go and grab the Kobiton info from the session that I want and bundle that up with the other artifacts, the test logs and results and all that good stuff. So that was extremely easy. I've found the REST API documentation to be pretty good with Kobiton, so I didn't really have too much trouble integrating that piece. The next one I'm going to tackle is the uploading new builds to the app repository, so I'll have to report back on how easy that ends up being. But so far I've been very, very pleased with it.
Great. Looking forward to that other piece there. Can you maybe speak a bit more about the complexity and process for implementing the smart locators?
So generally my process is start with the local device, get it working on the local device, because there's always going to be the basic things that you need to work through. Appium comes bundled, the Appium desktop, I should say, comes bundled with an inspector where you can connect to a live session, Appium session, and see the page source and kind of play around with it. That's been invaluable. So I use that tool to get the first crack at a locator. Then once I have it pretty much working on a single device, then I start pulling in more devices, typically using Kobiton Cloud because I don't want to run back and forth between the cabinet all day, and start ironing out, okay, how many devices does this locator work across? And if it works across the first 5, then I expand to 10. If it works across 10, spoiler alert, it never works across the first time. Then you just keep expanding until you have covered a wide range of form factors. And in our case, also, I need to cover not just different devices, but different application builds, because we maintain multiple versions for our different FIs. And so, start with one, expand out to a few devices, get that solid. Then I'll start testing against a different build. And at this point, I have in my back pocket a few builds that I know render differently. A few app versions, I should say, that I know render differently. So I'll make sure that I cover each of those across a range of devices. And typically what I'll end up with is some base class for the locators, which I know will cover the majority. If I'm lucky, then we have maybe accessibility IDs have been covered in both places. That's another area where I'm working very closely with the mobile team. It's an amazing team, and we're helping each other build up the apps to become more testable as I'm writing these tests. So in some cases, we actually have common locators across the board. In other cases, we need to be a little smart. So we'll have some base class of locators, and then typically that'll break down into an Android subclass and an iOS subclass. And then within the Android subclass, maybe I'll have some intelligence there for detect if you're in WebView right now and use this locator. If you're not, use this locator. So it's a somewhat organic process, I should say.
Wow, thank you for that. And I believe a question following on that was, how would you handle changing locations and time zones of devices in Appium?
That's an excellent question. I haven't had to tackle that problem yet. I know Appium gives a lot of control over if a device driver supports it, then typically Appium also supports it. And at bare minimum, if you have to execute, you can do raw UI automator commands. You can do raw ADB if you have to. So I feel like it's probably possible, but it's not something I've had to tackle myself yet.
Got it. Okay. Well, that appears to be all the questions that we have. We'll go ahead and wrap. I just want to say again, thank you to Jan and Jessica for the extensive knowledge today about both how you're thinking about approaching automation testing, and then also from a strategy perspective, and then also from a practitioner perspective, obviously how you're actually going about implementing those strategies. Thank you again for the wealth of information today.
Sure. Thanks for inviting us to speak, Drew. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Bye, y'all.
Have a great day.